are born wrong. That is what the midwives whisper when the infant's eyes glow in the dark, or when the candles die the moment it cries. Across a million worlds, the same story unfolds. A child dreams too vividly, speaks words it could not know, or hears prayers meant only for the dead. The Imperium calls them Psykers, conduits of the warp, vessels for the raw mind fire that kills worlds. To the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, they are a resource. To everyone else, they are a curse, but every day new ones awaken. And every day the Emperor demands his tithe. Most citizens never see what becomes of them. They imagine training halls, cathedrals of discipline, a place where faith tempers the soul's flame. But the truth is worse. Those who survive the Black Ship's journey to Terra will face the Emperor himself. Not in glory, but in consumption. For every 1,000 Psykers collected, only one will ever leave that place alive. The rest are fed to the Golden Throne, their essence burned to keep the light of the Astronomican lit for one more day. Humanity calls it duty. The warp calls it debt, and debt must always be paid. If you've ever wondered what it truly costs to touch the warp, if you felt that shiver when a Psyker lifts their hand and the world bends around their will, stay with me. Subscribe, share this chronicle, and walk deeper into the shadowed halls of the Imperium's most secret harvest. The story you are about to hear is not legend, but a prayer whispered by those who never came back. They never arrive with fanfare. There are no horns, no banners, no parades. When the black ships come, they appear like a sickness on the horizon, vast, silent, and patient. Their prows cut through the clouds, their hulls blacker than the void itself, reflecting no sun, bearing no name. To the people below, they look less like ships and more like verdicts handed down from the stars. On the agri-world of Kithera 4, the first sign wasn't sight, but silence. One morning the wind stopped blowing through the wheat. Birds vanished from the sky. The air grew heavy as if the world itself were holding its breath. Farmers left their plows in the soil and stared upward, shading their eyes against the glare. That was when they saw it, a shape eclipsing the morning, swallowing light as it moved. It wasn't falling. It was descending, and with it came the Emperor's will. Within hours, the administratum officials emerged from their fortified offices, flanked by local Arbites. Voxcasters crackled with decrees read in mechanical monotone. All Psykers will present themselves for collection. The words echoed through every hive, every hamlet, every lonely farmhouse perched beneath the twin suns. Panic spread faster than the order. Some tried to hide their kin. Children who woke screaming from dreams that came true. Old men who muttered secrets they shouldn't know. But there is no hiding from the black ships. The Emperor's gaze is patient and his servants do not forget. The Sisters of Silence arrived first. They disembarked in perfect formation, their armor catching no light, their presence bending the world into stillness. Even the wind avoided them. Every living creature feels the absence they carry, the blankness that suffocates thought. To stand near one is to feel the air turn cold, your own mind folding inward. Mothers fainted as they approached. Men forgot their own names mid-prayer. The Psykers, those unlucky enough to be born touched by the warp, screamed. Among the chosen that day was a boy named Lorian Hale. He had known for years that something was wrong with him. When he was small, he'd seen things in the corners of rooms, shapes that twisted when no one else could see, whispers that came through the cracks in the walls. His mother had kept him hidden, insisting the dreams were just dreams. But when the black ships came, he felt them before anyone else. A pressure behind his eyes, a taste of iron on his tongue. He tried to run. The Arbites found him by nightfall. The process was ritual, not arrest. The sisters took him in silence, bound his hands with sigils that burned against his skin. They led him and dozens of others through the dirt roads to the shuttle fields. Families watched from a distance, kneeling, crying, praying for mercy. None dared interfere. To resist the tithe is to resist the Emperor himself. Inside the shuttle, there was no sound except for breathing. The Psykers sat chained to their benches, blindfolded to preserve their sanity. Even sight could betray them now, for the warp could sense awareness like a shark senses blood. When the shuttle rose, Lorian felt his stomach turn, the pull of gravity giving way to the cold weightlessness of space. Outside the viewport, the planet fell away like a discarded memory. The black ship grew larger, its hull swallowing the stars. its surface carved with ancient sigils that seemed to move when unobserved. They docked in silence. The airlock hissed open and a wall of incense smoke and static rolled inside. Servitors stood lined in ranks, their flesh fused to machinery, their eyes replaced with dark glass. A robed figure greeted them, not human, not entirely. Its voice came from everywhere at once, layered and calm. "You have been chosen," it said. "Your gift is your burden. Serve and you may find purpose. Resist and you will be unmade." No one spoke. They were led through iron corridors that hummed with power. Every surface vibrated with the faint rhythm of the ship's passage through the void. The temperature dropped as they descended, and the air grew thick with psychic residue, the leftover thoughts of thousands who had come before. Lorien felt them brush against his mind like cold fingers, pleading, terrified, gone. The ship itself was alive, not in flesh but in thought. Every prayer whispered by the faithful, every cry of fear, every soul taken from the worlds below became part of its echoing heart. This was not a vessel of mercy. It was a harvest engine, its cargo the most dangerous resource humanity had ever known. As the doors closed behind them, the boy understood what his mother never had, that being chosen by the black ships is not a calling. It is a sentence, and the journey had only just begun. The corridors deep inside the black ship were built to deny hope. There were no windows, no color, no sky, only endless steel illuminated by thin strips of lumen that burned a sickly white. The air smelled of cold oil and incense, the scent of sanctified machinery. Chains clinked softly with every motion as the collected Psykers shuffled through the procession of captives, each step heavier than the last. Every so often, a muffled scream echoed from somewhere far below, then abruptly stopped. Lorien Hale did not cry, not because he was brave, but because fear had burned itself out of him. His tears had dried the moment the Sisters of Silence took his name. He sat chained inside a narrow cell, walls engraved with runes that shimmered faintly, drinking his thoughts before they could form. There was no sound in that place but the pulse of the ship and the quiet, collective heartbeat of hundreds of souls pressed into steel. Every few hours, though time meant little here, the sisters would pass through the corridors. They moved without footfall, their silence worse than any sound. Each carried a gilded staff capped with null sigils, the air around them bending like heat haze. Whenever they approached, every Psyker fell to their knees or collapsed outright, clutching their heads as if their minds were being torn apart from within. The sisters didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was punishment and a reminder. There was no thought, no whisper, no dream that could escape their notice. Days blurred into each other. Some tried to speak to the others, soft words of comfort, of defiance, but their voices withered in their throats. The runes devoured speech as easily as they devoured thought. Eventually no one tried. At night, if the ship could know night, the nightmares came. Sleep was not escape. It was invitation. The warp pressed its face against the hull, whispering through the seams, testing the walls between worlds. For the first time, Lorien felt it clearly. It wasn't a storm or a sea or even a voice, and it was awareness, ancient and curious. When it spoke, it didn't use words. It used memory. He saw his home, his mother's hands, the golden wheat bending beneath the sun. And then he saw it burn. He felt her voice calling his name through the flames, and for one terrible instant he almost answered. He woke screaming. The sisters arrived without sound. One of them raised her staff and the pain vanished, not soothed but erased. His thoughts flattened like parchment under iron. For a moment he didn't know who he was or that he had ever been. When his mind returned, the sister was gone and another cell was empty. Across from him sat an old man whose eyes glowed faintly beneath a lattice of scars. His lips moved in constant rhythm, whispering something too soft to hear. Lorien leaned closer and caught the fragments of the prayer. "He will not see me. He will not see me. What does that mean?" Lorien asked, his voice raw. The man didn't answer. He only looked up, and for a moment, Lorien saw what the scars concealed. Not wounds, but brands, marks of sanction long faded. The man had been trained once. Perhaps he had even served. Now he was being taken back. They called it the return tithe. Even the sanctioned were not safe from it. Hours later, or years, a new sound rippled through the hull. A deep resonant hum that vibrated through their bones. The lights dimmed. Lorien felt the pull of something vast beyond the walls, a gravity that tugged at his very thoughts. The ship was leaving real space transit. No one screamed this time. The last voices that had tried to fight the jump had been silenced on the first day. Instead, there was only the low moan of metal as reality itself stretched thin. For a single breath, the veil tore, and the warp poured in. Shapes flickered beyond the runes. Vast, impossible silhouettes glimpsed through steel. Faces without eyes pressed against the bulkheads, whispering names that no one had spoken aloud. A tide of color and light surged across the walls, alive, hungry, mocking. The ship's Geller field flared, blinding white, and the visions shattered into dust. When the light faded, one of the cells was empty again. Lorien stared at the space where the old man had been. The chain still hung from the wall, swaying gently, warm to the touch. In that moment, he understood what the voyage truly was. Not transport, not even punishment, it was winnowing. The weak minds would not survive the journey. The strong, so the stubborn, would endure, stripped of everything except the will to keep breathing. The ship rumbled. Somewhere deep within its heart, unseen servitors chanted hymns of containment, their voices layered with mechanical precision. The sisters passed again, their eyes cold beneath expressionless masks. And in the silence that followed, Lorien made himself a promise. Not of faith, but of refusal. He would not break. Not yet. Not until he saw where this road ended, because whatever waited on Terra had to be worse than this. Terra. The word alone had been legend once. The cradle of mankind. The throne of the Emperor. The heart of a million worlds. But when the black ship finally broke through the upper atmosphere, what Lorien Hale saw through the viewing slit was no paradise. The skies over the Imperial Palace burned with perpetual dusk, shrouded by incense smoke and industrial haze. Vast cathedra and spires pierced the clouds like spears, their surfaces crawling with lights and silhouettes. Pilgrim processions, flagellants, work gangs climbing across sacred steel. The planet's surface was less a world and more a wound that never healed. The crust of humanity's devotion layered upon itself for millennia. The ship descended into the docks below the palace. There was no welcome, only protocol. Servitors with incense censers drifted through the hangar, chanting binary liturgies as mechanical arms clamped onto the vessel's hull. The newly arrived Psykers were herded out in silent columns, hundreds of them, wrapped in gray robes and marked with numbered sigils. Each was flanked by a Sister of Silence or an Adeptus Arbit's guard in full armor. The air was heavy with fear and burnt oil. They were marched through kilometers of corridors carved directly into the bedrock. The architecture was oppressive, built not to inspire but to contain. Every surface was covered in hexagrammic wards and purity seals, their ink long faded by the touch of too many hands. The further they went, the colder it grew, the walls humming with a sound just below hearing, a psychic static that numbed thought. At last, they reached the Schola Psychana. To call it a school was heresy in itself. It was a labyrinth of stone cells and steel doors, each guarded by robed functionaries of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Vox chimes rang through the halls at irregular intervals, marking no time the human body could trust. Within, the testing began. Lorien was stripped, washed, and re-robed in rough fabric. His number was burned into his forearm by a servitor whose voice box recited the Emperor's litany of use as it worked. He was led into a chamber lined with auspexes and psychometric engines, where a robed examiner waited behind a veil of incense. The man did not look up. He simply extended a gloved hand. "Think," the examiner said. Lorien hesitated. "About what?" The voice was calm. "Anything." He thought of his mother. The examiner flinched as if struck. The lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. Then the man nodded and made a mark on his data slate. Emotive strength when volatile. Subject demonstrates undisciplined resonance. Potential moderate. Lorien didn't understand the words, but he felt the verdict in them. A Psyker's worth was measured not in humanity, but in how neatly they could be weaponized. Those who shone too bright risked instability. Those too weak were useless. The balance was delicate, and none of it belonged to them. The next days in our weeks, he could no longer tell, blurred into ritual and repetition. Every morning he was awoken by chimes and made to recite the 9 catechisms of the mind. Every hour, he was tested, by pain, by deprivation, by visions dredged from the warp and forced upon him by sanctioned telepaths. They wanted to see what would break him, how far his mind could bend before it snapped. Some failed quickly. Their screams echoed through the corridors until the sisters came to take them away. Others simply stopped, their eyes glazing over, their souls snuffed out by exhaustion or fear. No one spoke of where the bodies went. Lorien learned to endure. He built walls in his head, layering memory over memory, sealing his fear behind the image of the wheat fields of Kithara IV. When the instructors forced nightmares upon him, he imagined soil beneath his fingers. When they whispered temptations of voices that promised release, power, anything but obedience, he clung to a single thought: I am not yours. Yet even defiance carried a price. One evening, or perhaps it was dawn, he was brought before a golden mirror, a relic said to reflect the soul. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the machinery behind the glass. The examiner spoke softly. Tell me what you see. At first he saw himself, thin, hollow-eyed, a ghost of the boy he'd been. Then the reflection began to ripple. His face blurred, splitting into two. One half smiled. The other screamed. Behind both, something vast and formless opened its eyes. The room grew colder. The examiner made another mark on his data slate. Containment level, unstable. The mirror shattered. When he awoke, he was back in his cell. His arms were bandaged. His number 8114 had been carved anew, deeper this time. Across the corridor, someone wept quietly until their voice broke. It was only then that he began to understand what the Schola truly was. It wasn't a place of learning. It was a sieve, and every mind that entered was just another grain of sand to be sifted. Those who failed disappeared. Those who survived were emptied. And somewhere above, behind 1,000 locked doors, the Emperor's priests decided which souls would live, and which would burn for the light of humanity. Training came after the sieving. It wasn't teaching, it was reshaping. The ones who had survived the mirrors and the screams were gathered into narrow dormitories, where light and sleep rotated according to needs of the overseers, not the body. Every hour was a ritual meant to erode self. Recitations, fasting, controlled doses of psi dampers that left the tongue tasting of copper and the eyes watering blood. The instructors moved through the rows like surgeons inspecting organs for harvest. None spoke above a whisper. Sound here was rationed. Lorien learned the limits of thought. When his mind strayed toward memory, pain blossomed behind his eyes. When he tried to imagine the world beyond the Schola, nausea took him. The Telepathica called this discipline. He called it erasure. Yet inside that blankness a small rhythm endured, a pulse not wholly his own. Each time he repeated the catechism of binding, he hit a second beat beneath it, a defiance too small for the machines to read. Lessons blurred. How to shield a thought, how to channel a command without tearing your own mind, how to stare into the eyes of another and push until their will folded. The weaker students were encouraged to practice on each other. The sisters watched impassive as children made monsters of one another. Mercy was not forbidden. It was simply ignored. Those who hesitated vanished before the next cycle. Their cots were stripped and their numbers reassigned. Once during meditation, an instructor released the restraints that dulled their power. The air rippled. A dozen minds burst outward like sparks. Lorien felt every one of them, terror, hunger, the sudden exultation of freedom. For a moment, the warp answered. Voices crashed through the chamber, laughing, pleading, promising. Then the sisters entered, and silence fell as cleanly as a blade. The survivors lay gasping, emptied. The instructor marked notes on his slate. Response to stimulus, adequate. Survivors, 9. The experiment was considered a success. Days later, they were taken to the Chamber of Communion. It was vast, circular, walled in black stone veined with gold filaments that pulsed in rhythm with their hearts. At its center stood a column of light descending from a slit in the ceiling. A fragment of something greater, a radiance that hurt to look at. The examiner's voice echoed from every wall. Behold the Emperor's mercy, he said. He feels you even now. He knows your names, the light pulsed. It did not feel merciful. It felt like pressure behind the skull. A weight that demanded surrender. Some fell to their knees at once, weeping. Others screamed. Lorien stood until his muscles locked, until the brightness peeled thought from him in sheets. Somewhere inside the pain he felt another presence, cold, watchful, distant. It was not the Emperor. It was the measure of him, the faint gravity of an idea so vast that to perceive it was to fracture. He dropped to his knees and whispered words he did not remember learning. "I serve." The moment he spoke, the light withdrew. The examiners recorded his response as receptive. That night, his dreams were not his own. He saw 1,000 faces burning gold, heard prayers spoken in languages that dissolved as he woke. The next morning, his cellmate's bed was empty. Her number had been reassigned. The instructors called it ascension. The others called it what it was, selection. The ones chosen would never return. They were said to be taken to the golden throne itself, their souls offered to sustain the emperor's will. It was an honor spoken only in whispers, and in those whispers lay horror. Weeks later, the chimes rang a different pattern. Guards entered the dormitories, reading numbers from brass tablets. Lorian's was among them. He felt nothing, not fear, not hope. The selected were bound and blindfolded, led through descending halls where the air grew dense with incense and the sound of chanting filled every crevice. Somewhere ahead a door opened and heat washed over them like breath from a furnace. He did not ask where they were going. He already knew. The harvest awaited. The descent took hours, though in that place time had already lost its edges. The further they went beneath the palace, the thicker the air became, heavy with burnt myrrh and ozone. Every breath tasted of iron and ash. The walls were smooth, carved from dark stone veined with gold that glowed faintly, pulsing in time with a heartbeat too vast to belong to any living thing. The deeper they walked, the louder that pulse became, a rhythm felt more than heard, steady as eternity, immense as judgment. Lorian's group moved in silence, blindfolds still covering their eyes, the world reduced to footsteps and echo. Chains clinked, voices whispered prayers, and occasionally someone stumbled, followed by the short hiss of a last rod and a body dragged away. No one looked back. By now, even fear had taken on the stillness of ritual. When at last the blindfolds were removed, they stood in a chamber so large it could have swallowed cities. Cathedrals hung like lanterns from the vaulted ceiling, suspended by chains thicker than bridges. Rivers of molten gold flowed through carved channels in the floor, lighting everything in a blinding sacred dusk. Above it all loomed the Gate of Souls, a colossal arch of bronze and adamantium, engraved with 1,000 faces frozen in agony or prayer. The emperor's priests waited there, robed in crimson and black, their augmetic eyes glowing like embers. They moved with mechanical precision, each gesture timed to the rhythm of the chants that filled the chamber. The sound was immense, a living hymn of voices layered with the rumble of machines. Lorian felt it in his bones. The words were High Gothic, but the meaning was older, deeper. Sacrifice is the cost of salvation. A line of Psykers stretched before the gate, disappearing into the blinding light beyond. One by one they stepped forward, their chains released, their faces turned upward. Some walked calmly, lips moving in prayer. Others fought, screaming, begging for mercy. The Sisters of Silence ensured none escaped. The moment each crossed the threshold, their bodies convulsed, light pouring from their eyes and mouths as if their souls were being peeled away. The priests watched impassively, recording each name as it vanished into the golden brilliance. The air hummed with power. It wasn't warmth. It was pressure. Every thought in the chamber was drawn toward the gate, pulled into that radiant hunger. The warp pressed against the walls, a sea held at bay by blood and ritual. This was the true heart of the Imperium, not the thrones of its lords or the banners of its armies, but this furnace beneath Terra, where faith was burned into fuel. Lorian's turn came without warning. The chain at his wrist jerked, pulling him forward. His knees hit the steps before the gate. The priests looked down at him, their eyes reflecting the glow. One raised a rod crowned with the aquila, its metal wings blackened by centuries of smoke. Designation 8114. The priest intoned. Psyker class moderate. Stability rating uncertain. The Emperor receives all. He felt hands on his shoulders, cold and heavy. A sister stood behind him, her presence flattening the world into silence. The hum of the warp vanished. Even the chant seemed far away. For a heartbeat there was peace. Then the light took him. It wasn't pain, at least not at first. It was expansion, an unspooling of self. His body dissolved into sensation, every nerve a wire of fire, every memory pulled taut until it sang. He saw the chamber from above, the priests like insects, the molten rivers tracing patterns that mirrored constellations long dead. Then he saw further, Through the stone, through the layers of Terra itself, up through the palace and into the burning core of the throne. There, in a storm of golden radiance, something vast stirred. It wasn't the Emperor as the Imperium depicted him, not the man, not the god. It was the idea of him, a presence beyond flesh or comprehension. Around that presence, countless souls burned like candles, the offerings of millennia, each one a flicker in the infinite. He felt himself drawn toward that gravity, his thoughts unraveling into light. Voices surrounded him, the echoes of the sacrificed, endless, reverent, broken. We serve. We serve, we serve. He wanted to resist, but resistance had no meaning here. To think was to dissolve, and yet, somewhere in the depths of his fading mind, a memory held fast. Wheatfields, wind, the sound of his mother's voice. It was small, human, fragile, and because of that, it endured. The light recoiled slightly as if puzzled. The chant below faltered. For the first time in centuries, one of the offerings did not vanish cleanly. The light didn't release him. It hesitated. To the priests below, nothing seemed amiss. Their chanting resumed, steady, flawless. But inside the Gate of Souls, something changed. Lorien's essence was suspended mid-consumption, not freed, not devoured, caught in the still moment between breath and silence. The Emperor's will, or what the mind of man called his will, brushed against him. It was not a voice, not thought. It was weight, immensity without emotion, infinite purpose without choice. Yet through that magnitude, something like curiosity passed. The anomaly was being measured. Lorien's mind splintered under its gaze. He saw flashes, not of his life, but of a million others. Fleeting glimpses from souls burning alongside him. A mother cradling her child before the black ships came. A guardsman screaming prayers as his world burned. A scholar whispering forbidden knowledge before the noose. All of them converged into the light that fed the throne. Their pain was fuel. Their faith was function. Humanity's endless grief turned into energy. He understood then. The Emperor's mercy was not salvation, but utilization. No soul went to waste. The Astronomican was built not only on the Emperor's power, but on the endless harvest beneath him. Every day, every hour, Psykers died by the thousands, their essence woven into the golden tide that lit humanity's path through the void. He felt the pull again, that gravitational summons demanding surrender. He wanted to obey. His will faltered. But the memory of Kithra, that field of wheat and wind and sunlight, burned brighter. The simplicity of it, the smallness, that imperfection gave him form. He spoke, or thought, or perhaps simply was on a single word. No, the reaction was instant. The light convulsed, the warp trembled, and the gate flared as if struck by a weapon of unimaginable power. Down below, priests stumbled backward. Vox servitors screeching static. Alarms sang through the chamber in broken metallic voices. The gate's runes blazed scarlet. Within the light, he felt the Emperor's awareness focus like a sun turning its gaze. It wasn't anger that met him. It was astonishment, the faint surprise of an eternal will meeting resistance it hadn't anticipated. Your mind endures, something said. The voice wasn't sound. It was the resonance of command, vast and calm. Few do. Lorien tried to speak again, but his thoughts fractured under the pressure. The words scattered like glass. You are not meant for dissolution, the voice continued. Yet you cannot remain. The radiance pulsed and images filled his consciousness. Vast machinery surrounding the golden throne. The endless lines of Psykers brought to feed it. The black-clad priests tending to rivers of ash. The Emperor's own flesh, desiccated, unmoving, pierced by conduits of energy thicker than towers. And all around him in the souls of the sacrificed, billions upon billions, their essence flowing like tributaries into a single ocean of fire. He saw what the ecclesiarchy never would admit, that divinity, in its truest form, was machinery. Sacred only because humanity needed it to be. The light dimmed. I cannot keep you, the voice said. You would fracture within my design, go. And with that word he fell. The brilliance vanished. The world contracted into darkness. He plunged through the layers of the palace, through halls of steel and bone, past the pipes that carried sanctified blood, and the catacombs filled with nameless ashes. Down past the Schola Psychina, past the forges, past the roots of Terra itself, until there was nothing but cold and thought. He expected death, final, merciful. But when he opened his eyes, he found himself standing in a narrow chamber lit by dying lumen. The air was still heavy with incense and dust. He was alive, or something close to it. His skin glowed faintly from within, veins of golden light threading beneath the surface. A figure stood before him, a woman clad in the robes of the Astra Telepathica, her face hidden behind a veil of silver mesh. "You are not supposed to be here," she said, voice soft with awe. Lorien looked down at his hands, flexing them as if remembering the concept of flesh. "Neither are you," he said. The woman hesitated. "Then what are you?" He searched for an answer. None came. The light still pulsed faintly within his chest, but it was not the Emperor's. It was his own. "I think," he said at last, "I'm what's left when you refuse to die properly." The woman stepped back. "Then you are a danger." "Maybe," he whispered, his voice barely human. "Or maybe I'm proof." "Of what?" "That even in the heart of faith," he said, turning toward the shadowed corridor beyond, "the human soul can still say no." Behind him, the Gate of Souls continued its endless work, the light unbroken, the hymns resuming. The harvest went on, as it always had. But somewhere, deep beneath the palace, a single aberration walked free, carrying a piece of the light that should have consumed him. And in the warp above Terra, for the briefest instant, the Astronomican flickered. They told the people above that the Astronomican had surged, that the flare was nothing more than a holy resonance. Choir masters sang louder, scribes adjusted data slates, and the adepts at the Telepathica traced new glyphs to smooth the curve of the Emperor's light. No one asked why 1,000 sanctioned Psykers woke screaming in unison. No one asked why, for one heartbeat, the beacon's song had sounded like a human word. Below, in forgotten tunnels beneath the palace, a man walked who should have been ash. Lorien Hale wore no chains, no sigil, no number. He left faint after images when he moved, a shimmer like heat over stone. The glow beneath his skin had dimmed to a dull pulse that kept time with the world's hidden heart. He didn't hunger or tire. He simply endured, drawn upward by an instinct that was not quite memory. He found the surface not through corridors but through thought. One moment he was among dust-choked reliquaries and dead servitors. The next he was standing in the light of 1,000 censers that burned before the Skola's outer gates. Pilgrims crowded the causeways, eyes lifted toward the palace, chanting praise that sounded like thunder. None saw him pass. The sisters who guarded the archways turned their masked faces away, as if their vision refused to contain him. He walked among them until he reached the precincts of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, where the newly sanctioned were being let out for service. Rows of hollow-eyed Psykers, their flesh branded with the Aquila, filed toward waiting transports. The air trembled with the smell of sanctified pain. As they passed, Lorien felt their minds brush his, not thoughts but impressions, exhaustion, awe, fear wrapped tight in obedience. He felt the leash of their bindings and the whisper of the warp beneath it, restless as a caged sea. One of them faltered. A woman, young, her shaven scalp marked with sigils still raw. Her eyes met his, and for an instant she saw through the veil that hid him. Her breath caught. "You're," she began, but the word died in her throat. The sisters turned their heads sharply, and Lorien stepped aside into shadow. When they looked again, he was gone. He drifted through the hive of terror like smoke, drawn toward the places where sanctioned Psykers served. The first was a fortress bastion of the Astra Militarum, where astropaths lay in their crypts of glass, transmitting coordinates through the Sea of Souls. The air there was thin and metallic, the walls trembling with the echo of every message sent. Each transmission cost a piece of flesh, a memory, a dream. Their song was a harmony of loss. He listened. Through their joined agony he heard the warp's echo, a chorus of answering voices, distant but near enough to touch. It was a reminder that even here the soul was currency. The Emperor's light demanded constant payment. When the last note faded, he moved on. In the Schola Progenium, he found orphans who would one day become commissars and confessors, learning to fear the Psykers they would command. In the catacombs of the Adeptus Mechanicus, he saw engines built to calculate the probability of heresy in the human heart. Everywhere, faith and terror intertwined, inseparable. He began to understand his place. He was not alive, not quite. He was what remained of refusal, a shadow of humanity that had survived the furnace. And with that survival came sight. He could see the threads that tied every mind to the Emperor's will, a web of golden light stretching across the planet, binding the faithful, the fearful, and the damned. It was beautiful, and it was suffocating. For days, and or perhaps moments, he wandered the network of souls, watching the living and the nearly dead serve in their appointed patterns. Then from somewhere beyond the palace walls he felt a pull, a psychic tremor that vibrated through the web like a plucked string. Something was calling. Not the Emperor, not the warp. Something between. He followed it through the tunnels that led beneath the Astra Telepathica's sanctum, where the air smelled of dust and sanctified oil. The corridors narrowed until only thought could move freely. The pull grew stronger, steady, insistent. He passed the threshold into a chamber lit by a single candle that burned without smoke. At its center sat a hooded figure, surrounded by sigils carved into the floor. The candle's flame flickered once as though in greeting. "I wondered when you would come," the figure said. Its voice was calm, human, unafraid. "They told me one escaped the harvest." Lorien stepped forward. The glow beneath his skin answered the candlelight. "I didn't escape," he said. "I was sent back." The figure lifted its head. Behind the hood, two eyes shone with faint gold. "Then you carry something none of us were meant to keep." "I carry proof," Lorien said softly. "Proof of what?" "That we are more than what they burn us for." The candle's flame flared and the sigils on the floor began to hum. The chamber trembled as if the world above had drawn breath. "Then show me," the figure whispered. The candle's light wavered but did not die. The sigils on the floor brightened, spilling golden illumination across the chamber's walls. The hooded figure stood, its robe falling open to reveal the uniform of an Adeptus Astra Telepathica adept. High rank by its markings, though half the seals were blackened with deliberate fire. Lorien felt the pressure of the wards circle him like slow current. The symbols weren't meant to trap. They were meant to weigh, to measure. "You've seen the throne," the adept said. "Tell me what it was." "It's a wound," he said. "A machine to keep a god alive. And the god doesn't sleep. He works. We all do." The adept's hand trembled slightly and the candle guttered. "We always suspected," they said. "The harvest numbers rise. The choir masters die younger. The light brightens, but the prayers grow shorter. The Emperor's mercy costs more." They circled him, studying the faint glow beneath his skin. "You shouldn't exist," the adept murmured. "They should have burned every atom of you." "What keeps you?" "Memory," Lorien said. "And a word." "What word?" "No." It was almost nothing, just a syllable. But when he spoke it, the candle steadied and the room fell utterly still. The wards flickered once, then settled into a new pattern that none of the Telepathica texts had ever drawn. The adept looked down at their trembling hands and whispered, "He hears everything." "If the Emperor senses—" "He won't," Lorien interrupted. "I'm not a threat to him, I'm a reminder to us." The adept's eyes hardened. "That reminder could damn you." He smiled faintly, though the expression looked wrong on his face. "I was damned before I learned to speak." Something moved outside the chamber, the low, rhythmic footfall of the sisters. The adept snapped the candle's flame between their fingers, plunging the room into near darkness. "They'll feel the disturbance," they hissed. "Go. There's a passage through the reliquary tunnels. Take it and don't come back." Lorien hesitated. "You could come with me." "They'll never stop hunting you," the adept said. "But they might forget me." He turned to the door. The glow beneath his skin pulsed once, a slow heartbeat. "No," he said quietly. "They won't." The walls shuddered as the sisters' null aura swept closer. The adept pressed a palm to a section of the wall, revealing a narrow stair that coiled into the dark. "Go," they whispered again. Lorien descended. Behind him, the sound of armored boots filled the corridor, followed by a scream cut short. Then silence. The stair ended in a tunnel so ancient the stone itself seemed to breathe. The air was warmer here, faintly electric, vibrating with the hum of unseen machinery. He followed it until it opened into a vault vast enough to contain an entire city. This was no sanctum. It was a graveyard. Thousands of glass coffins lined the walls, each containing a body once known to the Imperium. Saints, psychers, martyrs. Tubes fed from their husks into conduits that vanished into the ceiling, channeling the last psychic residue of the dead upward, toward the throne. The light that bled from them was the same color as his own. He walked among them, reading the etched names. Astropaths, savants, heroes whose deeds had been turned into liturgy. All had become batteries. The faith of mankind fed its god, but the god's hunger never ceased. He stopped before one of the glass tombs. The nameplate had long been corroded, but the face beneath was intact, the woman from the candle chamber. She was already here, her eyes closed, her features calm. It had taken them minutes, something in him cracked. He touched the glass and it flared with light. For a heartbeat, her eyes opened. "Show them," she whispered, though her lips never moved. The vault shook. Lights flared red. The coffins began to hum as psychic pressure flooded the chamber. He felt the warp pressing in, eager, curious, watching. The conduits above shivered as if they could no longer contain the force building beneath them. Lorien stepped into the center of the vault. His hands blazed gold. The voices of the harvest had filled his mind. Thousands upon thousands, not pleading, not cursing, but waiting. "They've forgotten they are alive," he murmured. "It's time they remembered." He raised his arms. The glass coffins shattered in a wave of soundless light. The air erupted with brilliance as the stored fragments of souls, the remnants of every burned Psyker, surged free. They did not flee into the warp. They gathered around him, a storm of human light coalescing into form. In the streets above, pilgrims paused mid-prayer as the sky turned white. The Astronomican blazed, its beam widening, flaring, then dimming again to a steady glow. When the light faded, the vault was empty. The coffins were dust, and somewhere deep within the warp, something new was moving. Not a god, not a demon, but a collective breath of all the voices that had once been silenced. A whisper traveled through the sea of souls, faint but human. "Remember us?" Lorien's form dissolved into the current. Neither alive nor dead, carried upward toward the endless fire. The sea of souls convulsed. For a moment that stretched beyond any clock, the warp forgot itself. Its currents faltered, its predators stilled, and its colors inverted. Every hue turning inside out like blood retreating into the wound. The scream that followed was not of pain, but of recognition. Millions of spirits for centuries consumed in silence had remembered their names. They did not rise against the Emperor. They did not rebel. They simply existed all at once. The Astronomican shuddered as their remembrance rippled through its song. Where there had once been a single, clean beam of golden light, there were now countless smaller threads intertwined, flickering, human. The choir masters on Terra fell to their knees, their eyes streaming tears of blood as their collective link flared beyond its limits. Astropaths across the segmentum solar cried out in unison, their minds filled with a voice that spoke no word but carried the weight of one. "We remember." And through it all, Lorien Hale drifted, or what remained of him. He was no longer flesh, no longer the half-burned echo that had walked beneath the palace. He had become diffusion, a pattern of will carried by every freed soul like a refrain whispered through eternity. He could not command them, only share his memory. But that was enough. He saw through the eyes of others now, 1,000 at once, 1,000 worlds apart. A sanctioned Psyker on Cadia kneeling mid-transmission, her eyes blazing brighter than any star. A navigator on a deep void vessel, her third eye opening to a warp calmer than she had ever known. A preacher in a hive spire forgetting the script and speaking words that were not his own. Mercy is not absence. Mercy is endurance. On Terra, deep within the throne's machinery, the priest screamed that the readings were wrong, that the Emperor's light was fluctuating, that the psychic fuel was increasing, though the harvest had ceased. Panic turned to worship as doctrine shifted in real time, for to doubt was heresy, and what they could not explain they canonized. They called it the miracle of the 1,000 voices. They declared that the Emperor had whispered anew, but beneath the hymns and proclamations a quieter truth took root. The freed souls did not return to the warp's hunger. They did not vanish into madness or possession. They formed something new, a structure not of domination but resonance, a lattice of memory binding together like coral, each consciousness anchored in the others. No single will, no god, no tyrant, and only connection. Within that unity, Lorien found peace for the first time. The noise that had haunted every Psyker since humanity's dawn softened into harmony. The sea did not calm. It learned to breathe. And through that breath he heard it again, faint, like a heartbeat buried beneath thunder. The Emperor's will, vast and patient. The realization struck him like light through glass. The Emperor had never sought worship. The throne was not a hunger born of pride. It was containment, an impossible task made eternal by the devotion of the living. Every soul burned beneath his palace had not been wasted. Each had been a shield, a bulwark against the warp's truth, but it was a shield built from silence. Lorien understood now that what the Emperor lacked was not strength, but chorus. A god sustained by suffering is only half alive, and perhaps through accident or design, the moment he had resisted, he had given that god what faith never could. Remembrance that was shared, not consumed. He reached toward that vast golden presence, not to kneel, not to pray, but to offer. The memories he carried, the laughter, the dirt under his fingernails, the smell of wheat and rain, he let them go, dissolving into the light. The reaction was subtle but seismic. The throne's pulse steadied. The storms around Terra eased. The choir master's screams quieted into hymns of wonder. The warp rippled once, as if sighing, somewhere beyond all sound. The Emperor's will brushed his one last time. Not a command, not a word, just acknowledgement, and then softly, peace. The sea did not end. It never would. But for the first time since humanity learned to dream, it was bearable. Across 1 billion worlds, Psyker slept without screaming. For one night, the warp was silent. Silence in the warp is never empty. It is the kind that follows a great storm, when the world waits to see what has survived. The sea lay still, its surface unbroken, reflecting faint gold like dawn after endless night. Somewhere in that stillness, what had been Lorien Hale drifted. Not a ghost, not a god, but a remembrance carried on every thread of the Emperor's light. He saw what few could ever see, the Imperium from above, through the thin veil that separates faith from madness, countless worlds turning beneath a single radiance, every hive and chapel and trench lit by the same unseeing fire. Humanity's ceaseless prayer rose like smoke, and for once the warp did not devour it. It listened. The freed souls moved among those prayers like wind in wheat, unseen but felt. They did not speak. They simply were, presence without demand. Where despair festered, they steadied it. Where hatred boiled, they cooled it. The effect was infinitesimal on any single world, yet across 1 million, it was a pulse, small enough to go unnoticed by those who measured faith in armies, but vast enough to matter to those who still dreamed. Some called it a change in the tides, others a heresy. The ecclesiarchs ordered new litanies to describe it, never realizing they were trying to name what could not be owned. They said the Emperor had smiled. They said the throne had spoken. They were all wrong and all right, for within the throne the Emperor remained unmoving, flesh long since petrified, eyes forever closed. Yet his light, the endless beacon of his will, now carried more than command. It carried memory. Not his, but theirs. All the souls who had served and burned, who had given themselves to sustain him. They had not been lost. They had become his echo. In the warp, the predators stirred uneasily. The great shapes that had hunted thought since time's birth felt confusion for the first time. Not fear, but unfamiliarity. The sea was changing. The taste of humanity was different now. Less despair, more defiance, touched with something that felt like understanding. For creatures that fed on agony, it was poison. Lorien drifted closer to the center of that great stillness, drawn once more toward the throne's light. He felt no fear this time. The radiance no longer burned. It welcomed. Within it he saw not a god enthroned in death, but an engine made of every soul that had ever refused to yield. The Emperor was its heart, but mankind was its blood. He remembered the adept in the candle chamber, the whisper, "Show them." He had. And now in the deep places of the warp, that showing had become contagion. Every act of endurance, a mother's prayer over her child, a guardsman's last stand, a psyker's whispered apology before unleashing power, added to the lattice. The warp still raged, still devoured, but within it stood a pattern that did not belong to it. It was human. The sea trembled, not in fury but in recognition. The warp remembers everything. It would not forget this either. He could feel himself thinning, his own identity spreading through the lattice like light dissolving in dawn. He had no body to return to, no mouth to speak. But before he vanished completely, he formed one last thought. A message without words. A feeling without sound. We are still here. Across the galaxy. Psykers awoke with tears on their faces and no reason for them. In orbit over distant worlds, astropaths opened their minds and found the sea calmer than it had ever been. The choir masters of Terra recorded frequencies they had no language for, harmonies that resonated like the human heartbeat. And for a single second, the Astronomican flared so brightly that even the stars seemed to bow toward it. Then it settled. The priests called it the Emperor's mercy, the greatest miracle since his ascension. They would never know the truth. They would never know the name of the boy from Kythera 4, who had once said no to a god and taught a dying galaxy how to remember itself. In the black halls of the palace, a sister of silence paused before a prayer altar. The air trembled with faint warmth. She could not hear, but she felt a pulse beneath the stone, a heartbeat. Small but human. She pressed her palm against it and bowed her head. Far beyond the veil, the sea sighed, eternal, endless, but not alone. And in that impossible silence, the faintest whisper passed through the stars, "Hold the line." The light answered,